Bwrdd a chroeso, good morning and welcome everyone to this multi-location meeting of the Environment, Regeneration and Streetscene Services Scrutiny Committee. This is a special meeting today on the 28th of July 2023. I'm Councillor Sean Percy and I'll be chairing today's meeting. We are in a different room today and using slightly different technology to what we normally use, so there may be some issues. If there are, just please flag them up to us if there's any issues with sound or anything like that. And then just a reminder, particularly people in the room today, to make sure your phones are switched to silent. The system in here will pick up speaking all around the room as well, so that there's no individual microphones to mute. So just please also be quiet when other people are speaking. Would be great. And those at home, please keep your microphones on mute unless you're called to speak. In terms of speakers, I've got a list of prepared questions today from our pre-briefing, but if you do need to raise your hand to ask a question, please raise your electronic hand, or I've got one member in the chamber with me who could get my attention as well. So for the purposes of declarations of interest, I'd just like to confirm we'll be scrutinising items 5 and 6 on the cabinet papers today. So I'm now going to move on to agenda item 2, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest today?
I see no indications, Chair.
Okay, I can't see any. So as usual, if a member feels they need to make a declaration during the discussion, please raise your hand and let us know. We can sort that out on the item as well. So we're now going to move over to the cabinet agenda papers for pre-decision scrutiny. So as mentioned, we're doing the scrutinised items 5 and 6 on the cabinet agenda. So let's take us to item 5, which is commercial property grant, 14 Orchard Street, Neath, pages 3 to 16. Before I go to any questions, do officers want to add anything additional to the report?
Nothing further from myself, Chair.
Thanks, Andrew. So my first question is from Councillor Andrew Daisy.
Good morning, Chair. Right. Andrew, I was just wondering if there's a tenant secured for the building.
I don't think they have anybody in mind at the moment, Andrew, but I think there has been quite a bit of interest in it. But obviously the condition of the building at the moment isn't going to allow anybody to go in there until it is refurbished, because it is an important building. It's one we'd like to do because of its proximity to, the Gwyn Hall in particular. It's a bit of an eyesore at the moment.
Okay, you happy with that?
Yeah, thanks, John.
Councillor Carpenter, Denver. I'm not sure if you still need to ask me supplementary. Wayne?
Yeah, I think Councillor Dacey has in fact covered a lot of what I was going to ask, but I want to determine the ownership of the property.
I don't think the ownership is mentioned within the report, Councillor. Obviously, it's known to officers, and we can provide you with that information if you want us to.
That's fair enough. Thank you.
But I believe it's a lady that lives locally that owns it.
Okay.
Okay, so they're all the indications I've had in terms of questions from members on this item. The recommendations are listed on page 9 of the cabinet. Oh, sorry, Councillor Lockyer, do you wish to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Not in opposition at all. Just a comment that the scheme that Andrew's suggested this morning is a well sort of work scheme in Neath. He's quite right. It is an eyesore. It's been a successful business for many years as a hairdressers. I don't know if that's what the intention is for someone moving forward, but certainly it will enhance that area and something we strive to do within Neath. As you know, there are several parts, especially on the parade, that need enhancing. So full praise really for Andrew and his team for getting this scheme forward. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lockyer. Okay, so I'll take members now to the recommendations listed on page 9 of the Cabinet Agenda Pack. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please?
I propose, Chair.
So Tim Bowen and
happy to second, Chair.
so I've got John second. Thank you. If members don't indicate to the contrary, I will take it this decision is supported to Cabinet.
See no indications of contrary, Chair.
Okay, it's supported. Fantastic. Thank you, guys. Okay, so now we're going to move on to agenda item 6, which is the parking review options report. So we've got some pre-prepared questions on this item. Before we go to those, would the Cabinet member, Councillor Griffiths, wish to add anything before we go to
Yes, please, Chair. I'd like to thank you for your invitation for attendance this morning. And as you can see, that I've brought my officers along, and they would be only too happy to answer any questions that the committee has got for them. And I will ask any questions you got for me as well. No problem at all.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to run through a little bit of the background before we go into questions. There's been obviously quite a bit of interest in parking, as you can imagine, from the community at large and also from other members. As we've noted, we've got some observers to today's committee meeting. So I'm just going to briefly outline what the process has been getting to this point, and then we'll start taking some questions. So in terms of the parking report, earlier this year in the budget setting process, the administration agreed to raise an additional £200,000 from the parking service over this financial year. So that headline figure was included within the budget papers, but the detail on how that was going to be raised was not included. Obviously, it was inevitable that parking charges would raise as a result of that, but a report needs to be prepared with a detail of how that would happen and what would be raised. So that report was prepared by officers with options to raise income from the parking service. And I agreed as Scrutiny Committee Chair that we would look at that in a task and finish group to look at the proposals before the Cabinet member made a decision on them. So included in the papers today is our task and finish review report, which is at the end of the committee papers. And you'll note in there that we make several recommendations to try and ease perhaps some of the impacts into non-residents and businesses, as a result of the income that's needed to be raised. And today then we'll be asking questions to the Cabinet member in terms of his response to our report and recommendations. And again, just in terms of background, given that the decision to raise the income had already been taken at the budget, our remit as a Scrutiny Committee when we looked at these proposals was within the scope of having to raise that income. So we've not made recommendations as a task and finish group and a Scrutiny Committee that seek to undo the decision that's already been made at full council on the budget, because that's outside of our remit. So within the scrutiny process, we seek to make recommendations and amendments to the proposals that are within the scope of raising the income that's been agreed. And then again, particularly for any members of the public that might watch this recording back in terms of how the decision-making process is working, this committee is not a decision-making body of the council, but a scrutiny committee. So following today's scrutiny committee meeting, the Cabinet board will meet and make the decision on parking charges after today's meeting, taking on board the recommendations from the task and finish group, any comments made today, and they'll be making a decision following the meeting. So there's the background out of the way. So we'll now go to questions now to the Cabinet member, Wyndham Griffiths, and my first question is from Councillor Suzanne Pass.
Thank you, Chair. You're quite right, Chair. The decision to raise the amount has already been made in the budget, but it was only a single line. And when the budget went out to consultation, the public didn't have any details about this. I have a question, maybe for officers in the first instance, Chair, which wasn't, I hadn't thought of at the pre-brief, if you give me a bit of latitude here. On the IIA assessment, first stage, it says that, that a further stage is not required because only users of car parks will be affected. Now, I just wanted to ask, because I may have got this wrong. Disabled people are not given any reduced rates in the council for parking, are they? If somebody can answer that.
We have got some questions on these items already pre-prepared from the pre-briefing.
On the IIA, right? So I'll leave it then for that, for those.
I suppose the question is, so, but if officers come back, there may be follow-ups from members who would raise these issues. Councillor Timberwin had a question, and I've got a question in relation to this as well.
Right. So how do you want me to proceed then? Leave this or ask it later, or?
If you want to finish asking the question, but
Okay, thank you, Chair.
I'm
sorry. Yeah. So I just, if we as a council don't give discretionary amounts to disabled users for parking, then the statement on the IIA actually says it's only car park users that would be affected, but a lot of disabled people do use car parks. They're on fixed income, and I wondered how you come to the decision that a further investment, the next stage, is not required.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Patterson, for the question. I think it's important that I clarify for members that the blue badge scheme applies to on-street parking. It does not apply to off-street parking in terms of any concessions.
Right.
The second thing is that within our car parks, we do locate all of the disabled parking bays as close to the exits and accesses to the car parks and the pay and display machines to aid their sort of accessibility issues. The other thing I need to add is that obviously the blue badge scheme nationally is not it's not a fiscal or assessed on a means test basis. So the ability to pay is not a consideration. So I just wanted to clarify those points.
Right.
You're probably familiar with the blue badge scheme, and my colleague Steve here, the parking manager, can explain some of the concessions that are given on street if you're not clear on those.
I sort of take that point, but I was just looking at it from the point of view that it says that disabled people are not adversely affected. However, any increase in charges, and I'm not going on the blue badge scheme, but I'm just saying as a council, are we taking cognizance of how we are affecting disabled people on a fixed income if you raise the charges? So if my question is not able to be asked, please somebody point that out.
No, thanks, Suzanne. And I think this is something that I picked up in terms of the IIA in its state, and there was no impact on disability. And I think perhaps I maybe disagree that there may be a low impact, but an impact on people with disabilities because they do use the car parks.
Correct.
And will then be affected by the parking charges. So that's I guess the clarity around that.
That's the point I was trying to make,
yeah.
Chair. Not necessarily about blue badges and how they're given out, but generally as a council, if we raise the parking charges, it's obvious to me that disabled people will be affected by that. So I don't know how you can say that a second stage might not be required. To look into it more deeply. That's all, Chair. Thanks. And then I'll come back to what I was going to say.
Did you want to come back?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Yeah, I think it's a point of some wider principles, really. That have got cars and are able to run and fuel the car, insurance it, tax it, are generally in a better financial position than a lot of our residents with local authority. Now, you will know from that the position is we've got a lot of people that can't afford to buy cars. They haven't got any means of transport other than public services, local bus, and that's challenging in its own right. So what I'm trying to say is people that generally can afford to run a car can afford to pay some contribution in terms of parking charges to actually help the council maintain those facilities. That's a wider challenge, I suppose, to members across the board, really, that we've got a lot of residents in our communities that can't even afford to buy a car. That's the general point, really. And the other aspect is all of these car parks cost a considerable amount of money to maintain, to pay the increase in energy costs, the general maintenance of the buildings, and security as well. So there's a balance to be struck. As I say, the blue badge scheme is not means tested. So it's not a fiscal issue in terms of liability. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm going to just to try and keep the meeting kind of coordinated a little. I'm going to just
I apologise, Chair, because I didn't have this in my head at pre-briefing.
So that's fine. I'll come back to you, Councillor Patterson, because I'm going to bring in. I'm going to make one further point and then bring Councillor Tim Bowen. Just let Tim know if he's around on his question, which was specifically around. But I guess just in terms of the point that was being made, I think it's specifically about the IIA in terms of does the initiative impact people because of their disability? And it says no. And I think the point committee members are making is actually there is an impact. It may be that impact is low and that impact can be managed. But I think my view reading this, if the proposals affect car park users, some of which are disabled users, the impact will have an impact on disabled users. I think that's the point that the committee is sort of making on the IIA. But I'll bring in Tim because we had a question on blue badges. We're in that realm of discussion now. So Tim, did you want to come in on your question, which was in relation to the recommendation the task and finish group made around time, extra time for blue badge holders in car parks? Tim?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And taking on what the officers have just said, I can totally understand what everybody's saying. When we had the task and finish group, we looked at possibility of allowing disabled users an extra hour for them to be able to get to where they go in, maybe get their wheelchairs out and, so forth. I can understand what Dave is saying and I take that on board. Even if we can look at rolling it out in certain car parks within the towns, that they get an extra hour. Because I know this is going to be brought up with Nathan later about Pontydowie, so I won't get into that. Is that something we could look at? Because I don't know if anybody's seen Facebook the last couple of nights of been starting to get slated on the parking charges and everything going up. So I think giving something back, that extra hour, I don't think it's going to increase us too much. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. I'll just add to that as well in the sense of, you've talked about people, with a blue badge maybe taking extra time to exit into their cars. It may take them longer to shop. We also, given the parking increases are on the hourly rates as proposed and not on the all-day parking rates, it actually may disproportionately affect disabled users who may take longer, may go over that hour threshold, and therefore need to pay more than they would have otherwise paid. So I think that was the rationale, wasn't it, behind the task and finish group's recommendation. We had quite a thorough discussion around it. And I suppose, I'd be interested to hear from the cabinet member really around the thinking of the response. I don't know whether you've got a view on that window in terms of.
It's actually in the report, Chair. The recommendation is recommended that due to current financial pressure based on parking budget, that blue badge holders can pay full charge. So it's an volume.
From an officer's perspective, we recognise that and we're guided to take into account the issues of disability, and that's why we locate, as I mentioned, all of the disability parking close to the access and egress and the paint display machines. So we made a recommendation. It's based upon the primary issue of the concession of a blue badge is for on street and not off street. That's the fundamental point that we wish to make. And then secondly, that we've got a difficult budget position where we've got to try and break even on the parking account. Do you want to?
Sorry, Chair. With the blue badge scheme on street, they get 3 hours of double yellow lines, provided they put the badge up and the clock at the same time. And they're also exempt any time limit within the limited waiting bays. So if a limited waiting bay in the town centre is 2 hours, a blue badge holder is exempt from the time limit. But
So they could park there all day.
Park there all day.
So I think it's very important that blue badge holders actually read the badge book, because a lot of them don't, and they don't realise, I think, the concession that they actually have on street.
Okay, I think the principle perhaps of what we were putting forward is to make sure that that concession was consistent, I suppose, and extended into the surface car parks as well. And I think it's probably recognises limited opportunities for people to park on the street around the town centres. And but I take your point. There's some concessions there, but I think the principle was ensuring that that was available in the car parks as well. But in terms of the cabinet members' response to this, obviously, there's a limited amount of blue badge parking bays in the car parks. What was the assessment around financial calculation around this? In terms of coming to the decision that it was too.
The calculation of the on subject, in my opinion, you asked me my opinion about what the badge is. I feel that if someone has a blue badge, they have a problem, an illness or whatever, and they're entitled to park where they're allowed. And but further, I would say that not all disabled people are not able to pay for the parking. And I will refute that, because as a disabled person myself with a blue badge, I've got no problem with parking, because my concession is that I've got a blue badge and the facilities are there for me. And on road parking, I do agree with the officers when they say that people with blue badges should read the book, because they don't. And there's lots of concessions for people with blue badges, but I don't think they want to be put into a category where they can't pay their way. And I find that myself demeaning as a blue badge holder, and have held a blue badge for 40 odd years after serving in the military and having been discharged. So I do think it's a bit demeaning that people are said, well, you've got a blue badge, you can't afford to pay. And no, I don't think that's right. Concessions are there. The officers have answered it correctly, and that's my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Wyndham. I've got a couple of indications. I'm not sure we'll get through them all, but I'll come back to Councillor Bowen first, because he asked the initial question.
Yeah,
Did you want to?
thank you, Chair. And this is aimed at Wyndham. We weren't trying to demise any disabled people about paying. That was not our objective. What we were trying to do is just trying to make life a little bit easier for that person that could be in town, can't get back to their car or whatever in the Pacific time. So that's all we were saying, is a bit of a concession for them, that if they were struggling to get back, that they would have that opportunity not to come back and get a ticket. So, that's all we were looking at, is certain places, if it could have been one multi-storey car park in Neath, perhaps somewhere on the beach. I think the beach is the biggest one where people struggle to get down to the, across the roads, down to the sand or whatever, and get back to the vehicles. But please don't take it that we were trying to, undermine any disabled person, because that wasn't our intention at all. Thank you.
No, thanks, Tim. I think that's right. It was around leveling the playing field in the sense that actually an able-bodied person could make that shop within an hour. Somebody who's disabled may take longer and therefore will have to pay a higher charge because they have a disability. And I think that's what we were seeking to balance out, was actually somebody who's disabled shouldn't be unfairly penalised and having to pay more to park for longer because of their disability. And I think Tim sort of covered that very well. I'm gonna take I've got an indication from. I'm going to take the next two and then we'll try and move on. We've quite a lot to get through. I've got Councillor Carol Clement-Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to make this personal, but to be fair, some people don't have a second income when they have a blue badge. They're unable to work. But what I would say is, with two very close relatives of mine who can't walk 20 yards without having to take a break, I challenge that impact assessment. When we have training for IIAs, it doesn't matter whether the council can afford to pay, whether we need to fill a gap of so many £1,000s. That impact assessment, it doesn't matter whether they can afford to pay. And I don't believe, as Councillor Bowen said, anybody was suggesting that just because you've got a blue badge, you can't. I'm feeling this really strongly, to be quite fair. And I think if challenged, this impact assessment would be thrown out of court. It does impact on disabled people more than able-bodied people. My family, two members of my family, wouldn't have an option to walk into town. They'd have to take a car, and then it's a struggle. And I believe that this does impact disabled people more than able-bodied people, and therefore I think this impact assessment is not worth the paper it's written on. I leave it there now, Chair, because I'm quite angry, to be fair, and I don't want to hear arguments about disabled people have this and that and the other. Very often you can't find on-road parking, and very often for that person to make that journey in the first place takes hours of preparation to be able to go. They're shattered by the time they get to town. I'm sorry, but I think this is well out of order. That impact assessment needs to be redone. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Carl. I'm going to bring in Councillor Patterson and then we'll come to any responses required. I think Carl,
thank
you,
you,
your
I'm sorry, I seem to have opened a can of worms there, and I do apologise for you're trying to run the meeting in a distinct way, and I've upset that.
We're coming on to this item, Suzanne, so it's no problem at all.
Okay, right. The recent discussion in this committee sort of proves my point. If anybody was to look at the assessment and look at it, does not require further investigation, right? That it doesn't bear up, because we need to show as a council, I would like to know if we were in the clear legally now, to show that we have given due regard to people who are disabled. And that impact assessment just sort of says, well, you know, it only responds to people who are using a car park. And I'm not arguing for or against any of the proposals at this point. I'm just saying, as a council, if we say no further investigation is required, are we in breach of of anything there? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Suzanne. I'll go to officers for a response. And we have got to leave lots of questions.
Again, Chair, what I can only say really is that this is it's an on-street scheme. So legally, the blue badge is an on-street concession.
But I think actually two things.
If members feel strongly about that, this is a national scheme, okay? So if members feel strongly about that, you should be lobbying central government to change the scheme. The other aspects are, and I don't disagree with that, but what we're trying to do here is apply the concession as in by badge scheme. Now, if council, and bearing in mind several administrations prior to where we are today, took those decisions as well, that go back many years, at least to 2010, then the same things applied then. There's nothing changed on that blue badge scheme. So, you know, it could be open to challenge. I don't know. That said, the concession is an on-street scheme. You could be challenged as a council, but it's at the discretion of the council, would be my view. It's not a determined aspect in that respect.
I think
Chair,
perhaps
I'm awfully sorry, but
I'll go back for a moment. I think perhaps we're mixing up two things to a point. I
yeah,
accept what you say, the blue badge scheme, that's the factual sort of basis of the blue badge scheme. What we're talking about here is the decision that is proposed in the report and the impacts of the decision in the report on disability. That includes disabled people parking in the car parks, which is a slightly distinct thing from what the national blue badge scheme is. And we have a duty as a council to take regard of that, which is what the impact assessment is. And I think members are questioning whether the decision to say that there's no impact on disability as a result of this decision is correct or not. And that's distinct from what the national blue badge scheme is. That they're slightly separate questions. And I think that's what they're seeking a response on, is are we confident members feel that there is an impact on disability as a result of this decision? Are you confident there's not, I think is the question.
Yeah, I can only reiterate what I've previously said. If you look at the blue badge scheme, the sections are clear there. It does not apply to off-street parking. You can't, they're intrinsically linked, the disability and the blue badge, so you can't separate them. I take your point on board, but the blue badge scheme also says, please check when we go to off-street parking what the charges and concessions are, if there are any. So I don't think we've broken any legislative position on that. The actual challenge around the disability, I think, is a different matter. But this is about the actual blue badge scheme, and you cannot separate the two items in my view. I'd be stand to be corrected, and ultimately the cabinet can decide whether or not on this item, whether they want to proceed with this item or to actually review it further and get a formal legal opinion.
Can I just read the legal officer and legal officer indicated?
Yeah, of course. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to advise on the blue badge scheme itself. I'd look to the officers for their subject area expertise on that. Obviously, it's something that could be taken away further legal impact input was required on that. However, the issue, I think, as regards to the integrated impact assessment is whether members have all the information they need to make the decision in hand today. I think that's the issue. So it's, I suppose, back to the officers as to their view that impacts, that integrated impact assessment does provide all the information that members require, so they have due regard to all of the issues. It may be that it could be noted that there is an impact, and then members would have that to take into account. But obviously that's not determinative of the outcome.
Okay, Chair, do you want me to read out what it says in the blue booklet that's given to every blue badge holder about off-street car park?
no, it's not that. I'm not debating it.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is,
Chair, it's got nothing to do with a blue badge.
No, I think I don't really want to carry on going down that. But the discussion we're having is on the decision the council is taking.
Right. Yes.
And they said
But
that.
yeah, from the legal perspective, the issue is have the members got all the information they need to make the before them today, based on how the integrated impact assessment must be.
I've got nothing further to add, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on for now, if that's okay.
Can I come back
Go along.
quickly, Chair? Can I come back?
Right, briefly.
I think we've gone off the beaten track here, Chair.
No.
The question we were asking is, are we going to allow an extra hour in the car parks?
My question.
Or aren't we? There was nothing in there about blue badge, and I think we really need to move away from this. That was a question. Are we going to give them an extra hour? Yes or no? Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. I'm going to move on to some of the other questions we've got in the report now. I think officers have said everything they can, oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry, Chair, it was only about the pressure of, perhaps getting a ticket because you're going to rush back. And just to check with officer, that is the light permit available on all the car parks?
Yes.
So perhaps we should make it wider, available, that you can literally do it, if you are struggling, you can do it off your phone. So not for people to feel pressure that they need to get back, which might ease, if you are disabled and pressure to get back to the car park, you can just add the extra hour or whatever on the white box. It is restriction.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Lee. Right. I'm going to move on now to Councillor Nathan Goddard-John, a question on Pontardawe car parking.
Thank you, Chair. And can I just note that I think there's something that is really important in this report that we had, is that we're going to actually get rid of the car parking fee for carers. So on page 31, it does say that care worker permits will become free of charge, which I think is very commendable, and it is very good for those people who are serving our community. So a good big props on that one. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a quick and simple question. Hopefully it won't be as long a discussion as what we just had. But noting that car parking charges are going up all across the borough, why is Pontardawe any different?
Okay, shall I?
Question to Wyndham, I think, in terms of the response to the.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things with Pontardawe parking, with previous administrations, there was a long debate taken on how Pontardawe was given the free hour parking. So to cut the long story short, if you like, because it wasn't in the recommendations from the task and finish group, the officers and myself thought it just prevalent to go ahead with how it was and to help the traders in Pontardawe to carry on their businesses as they've been doing for years. And so they decided that we would bring Pontardawe car parking in line with all the car parking in the borough, i.e. Sunday parking was free, it's now being charged for. And that was the relevant idea of this keeping as it was. But as I said, over previous administrations, this was hotly debated, and we don't even go back into a hotly debated situation again. So as it wasn't in the recommendations from the task and finish, we carried on the way it was.
Nathan, did you have any follow-up on that?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. It was my understanding that it was in there, but if it wasn't, then that is my oversight, and I do apologise. But just then picking up on what Wyndham said, and the question can be answered by officers or cabinet members, I don't mind either way. But if it's acknowledged that, whilst I might disagree, but acknowledge that free parking is encouraging footfall into town centres, then why is Neath and Talbot not having the first hour for free parking? So it's just that contradiction. Do you get me? If it works for Pontardawe, then it should work for Neath and Talbot. But if we're increasing car parking charges, then it should also apply to Pontardawe. That's just where my confusion lies. But yeah, and apologies if I have misspoke on it not being a recommendation. It was my understanding that it was a recommendation that we do have car parking charges in Pontardawe, but I digress. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, I think at the time, and this is going back a number of years, there was an economic sort of review of the town centres in terms of the type and size of the retail offer in the town centres. Now, clearly, Talbot and Neath have got a bigger offer than Pontardawe still determined as a town, but a much smaller single high street and conurbation there supporting that community. So that was probably the fundamental decisions why the administration at that time came to that view. I got nothing for that then, Chair.
Okay, so I guess the decision is, so the thought is that position hasn't really changed.
It's not really changed.
Okay.
Is what the members we discussed with the members.
Are you happy with that, Councillor John?
So just to clarify, it's just a political decision to still allow Pontardawe to have free car parking.
Well, it was based upon, as I said, the type of offer that's available in the main town centres of Neath and Port Talbot compared to Pontardawe. So that was the sort of principle underlying rationale there. But ultimately, I mean, the council and the cabinet can take a decision either way. That's a matter for the cabinet.
Noted. Thank you very much.
Thank
you, Chair. One of my concerns, I want to kind of link it to Councillor Goldjohn's question, is that as a member who was on the task and finish, we were asked by the coalition how we are going to essentially raise funds through parking. So here's where I'm struggling to understand why Pontardawe wasn't included. I understand that it's always been that way, but the specific question was, how are we raising funds through parking? It seems odd that Pontardawe was protected from that question. My main question is in concern with Port Talbot and Neath Town Centre. So Viva Port Talbot work incredibly hard trying to get people back into the town centres. So this is they're going to be in a position where they're looking at Pontardawe and saying, well, they've been protected from this fundraising that the coalition have asked us to do, but Port Talbot and Neath aren't. So my question to yourselves is, will traders and organisations be consulted before these changes are made to the town centre parking, especially in Christmas parking arrangements? Because I understand the officer's point when he said that if you've got a car, then you can probably afford to, you know, pay the charges. But actually, the reality of the ground is people are making decisions based on a few pounds. We're in a cost of living crisis, and that few pounds difference makes a difference on whether they're going to town or not. It makes a difference whether they're going to be buying the extra cereal or not. So I just disagree fundamentally with that point. I want to see whether the traders have been consulted on this, because I'm quite disappointed that this was talked about in detail in the task and finish and it hasn't come into the recommendations.
Yeah. Chair, may I respond? Yeah, we weren't approached. We weren't approached directly by Neath or Pontardawe town centres in relation to the document parking strategy. Obviously, we've got town centre management managers in place that meet them on a regular basis, and it will come as no surprise that all the town centres knew that there was going to be a parking review. There was a specific inquiry submitted by Viva Port Talbot to the authority, and we responded to that via, I think it was Democratic Services, saying to Viva Port Talbot that if you wanted to raise any concerns associated with the parking fees, that they directly contact the chair of the Scrutiny and the chair of the Task and Finish group. Now, I don't know if that took place, but it doesn't sound as though Viva Port Talbot did indeed follow that advice.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just bring it back to what I was saying? I do want to hear from the coalition on this, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are pushing this. So Viva Port Talbot and I spoke about these parking charges, and they raised concerns with myself about this and about the impacts that it's going to have and about the lack of impact that it's having on Pontardawe. It just doesn't seem fair, and I'm quite keen that decisions from this council and who's making those decisions are taken from a point of intersectionality. So I just want to hear why there's been kind of a lack of engagement and why the businesses there are not being listened to in this cost of living crisis.
But I don't think there's been a lack of communication with Viva.
Engagement, not communication.
Engagement, and they spoke to the managers, the town manager, if it was Andrew, I don't know which one they spoke to, and they were directed if they had any anything that they wanted to ask, any input, was to get in touch with the chairs, or the chair of the Task and Finish group, which puts it back in their lap to do it. Now, if you're inferring that we've made a political decision about Pontardawe to safeguard Pontardawe, we didn't make a decision ourselves really, because it was the decision for Pontydowie to have the hour free parking was made long before I came on the council by a different administration. But we looked at your task and finish recommendations, and if you look at it, Pontydowie isn't mentioned. So we didn't go with Pontydowie. We kept Pontydowie free parking for 1 hour, as had been decided, but we put up all the other fares, plus parking on Sunday. So I think that where we are concerned, we've been fair across the board.
Okay, I'm going to make 2 points. One is to sort of reiterate the question initially, which is, will there be consultation, or has there been consultation on these specific proposals with the traders? So that's one point. And the second point I want to make is, I'm slightly uncomfortable with the position that when a proposal to make changes to parking charges is put forward by the administration, that they are then being directed to me as a scrutiny chair to give feedback. Ultimately, the decision on parking charges is going to be taken by the cabinet members, and the proposal to increase parking charges was put forward by the administration. And I'm happy to receive feedback from the traders in that process in the scrutiny committee that we went through. But we are only scrutinising the proposals put forward by this administration. I don't think it's appropriate that the traders were directed in the first instance to me as scrutiny chair. Ultimately, the cabinet are the ones accountable for making the decisions on parking, and it's for the cabinet members to have those discussions, have that engagement, listen to the traders. It's not for them to come to me as a scrutiny chair in an opposition position that is reviewing the decisions of the cabinet. So I think it's really important that I make that point. But I think the question needs to be answered around, are these proposals going to be going up to consultation with the traders?
Yeah, can I answer that?
Absolutely.
If the committee agree to raise the charges, we have to formally, legally advertise the charges, i.e. any traffic orders on street, the off-street car parking order, any charges has to be advertised. During that period, anybody who wants to object against these will object in writing to the authority, and we will have to take these objections back to board. So yes, people can object against them when we formally advertise the off-street car parking order.
So there'll be a formal advertisement, but there'll be a consultation process. So we'll be reaching out. So there won't be a consultation. There'll be an advertising statutory procedure. What is the timescale for that? You don't mind. How does that? How long is that process take?
Off the top, I think it's 28 days.
Okay.
Chair, can I please come back in?
Bear with me a minute so I can just figure out where I am in this discussion.
Yeah.
I've got a cabinet member to come back in, and then I've got a few members. I'm just going to go through them. Scott?
Yeah, only briefly. Thank you, Chair. I can see you're better on the consultation, and that's just been the statutory consultation element has just been answered. I think it's something that we need to take back really, I think, with officers in terms of going forward of who should be the point of contact when these complaints, concerns come in, you know, for example, by Aviva. But equally at the same time, I can see the understanding of it, you know, the appropriateness of it going to yourself, you know, and leading the task and finish. Maybe it should have come to the cabinet as well, you know, or a point of contact directly for officers and then fed in. But a question that I come back to Stephanie and ask is, obviously, presumably you was part of the task and finish. Did you raise these concerns on behalf of Viva in the task and finish group? So it's not, what you're saying is it's not reflected in the report?
No, what I'm saying is that, and I think the chair is trying to raise the point, but we're not really getting through for some reason. But the point is, it's the coalition that are making this decision. As a task and finish, we would just look at it. Viva Port Talbot, I did their questions within the task and finish, and I still need to raise these issues to the people that are making the decision, which are yourselves, to ensure that you are considering this. And there is a difference between the statutory notification and the consultation. So obviously we have to do the statutory notification, but we've just been informed that there will not be a consultation. And I think that there seems to be this confusion over the decision makers and the people scrutinising those decisions, and we need to make sure that we're getting answers from the decision makers.
Yeah, thank you for your response to that. And lastly, just an observation, my colleague already raised it. Let's not forget this was a decision made by the previous administration with regards to Pontydowie. Is the scrutiny now suggesting that decision should be changed? Is that the conclusion?
Probably the final point, because I don't feel like we're getting anywhere, and I'm getting quite frustrated, so I'd rather just move on. The point that I'm trying to raise, I did link it to the Pontardawe issue, but I'm focused on my constituents and the business owners that live in my ward. And the point is that we were asked to raise funds through parking, which should raise the question to everyone. It's not, let's do the thing we were doing before, let's raise charges in the county. But what I'm focusing on and what I want to bring everyone back to is the impact that it's having on Neath and Port Talbot Town Centre. And I really think there should be a consultation with Neath and Port Talbot business owners, which there hasn't been.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't asking you the question about Pontardawe. I was asking the chair because some members remotely have made observations regarding the Pontardawe. So I just wanted some feedback and guidance as to where the committee's going with the Pontardawe.
No, the committee's not made a resolution on it, so I can't speak for what the committee's view is wholeheartedly. But I understand where the question is coming from, which is actually the original report we were given by officers to consider as a task and finish group included a proposal to scrap the hour parking in Pontardawe. We made no comment on that as a task and finish group. We didn't make a comment either way on that, but that was the proposal that was put in as an option to raise revenue. As a cabinet, when you've considered that report, you've made the choice to retain the 3 hour parking in Pontardawe. And the questions from members are, given the context of this is raising income, and actually raising income and charges across the board is having an impact on town centres, why was that decision taken to retain that in Pontardawe and perhaps place extra burden on other town centres? I think that question's been answered, but that was the basis of the question. But as a committee, we didn't formally reach a view on that proposal specifically. But I've got Councillor Goldup John, I think needs to leave shortly. Did you still have a question to ask, Nathan?
You summarised what I was going to say, Chair. I just refamiliarised myself with the documents we had at the task and finish group, and it was what you just said. It was option 3 in there, and although we didn't maybe formally recommend something, as I suppose you're acknowledging, Chair, that it wasn't our place to say this is what you need to do. It was there, and it was an option to raise money for the council in the light of us budget setting a higher target for increased car parking. So that's all I wanted to say, but I think you touched upon that. So thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, I've got two other indications now. Councillor Dacey and Councillor Lockyer. They're two town centre councillors. I'm sure they'll have some comments to make on this. Councillor Dacey.
Yeah, I'd agree with the councillor Shaw regarding Viva. You've got to consult with them. They're trying to reinvigorate the town centre by putting lots of things on. They need to be consulted and need to be heard, at least give their argument. With regards to Pontardawe, I think it should be a level playing field across the town centres, in my opinion. So whether the hour is free in Neath and Talbot Town Centre as well as Pontardawe, or there's a charge in Pontardawe as well. Now, otherwise one is going to get favoured over the other. Obviously, the town centre is part of our ward, and I have a vested interest in this, but you've got to speak to Viva. That's my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I'll bring in Councillor Lockyer now.
Thank you, Chair, and I've remiss of me to not thank you earlier on for letting me attend the meeting. Yeah, look, from my point of view, the traders I spoke to in Neath, and really this is probably answering Dave's point, Dave Griffiths' point, who I've got huge respect for, Dave. But I think we've had a few changes in town centre managers over the past year or so, and none of the traders I've spoken to know anything about the proposed parking increases, let alone residents. And as was pointed out, my ward is wholly sort of the town centre and immediately surrounding. So the £5 increase in on-street parking is going to affect everyone there, as will the increase in the car parking charges. It's a difficult one. I appreciate that. But, the new tariff will aid recovery following the pandemic. Well, everyone's in that boat. So every person who lives in Neath North, who uses the town and uses the car park, is equally, if not more so in many respects, affected by the pandemic and the effects it's had. I just think it needs to be looked into in a far greater detail than it has. I don't think there's been consultation with everyone. It seems to me like the point that Councillor Grimshaw is picking up regarding Port Talbot has also happened in Neath, and that, for whatever reason that is, I don't know. If it was the town centre manager that should have informed the businesses, that hasn't happened. I'm not putting blame on them. I'm just saying it hasn't happened, and I really would strongly recommend that we take a look, step back. Let's have a look back at this again, particularly about the Christmas parking, etc. That's you know, any excuse to go online now, any excuse to go to a shopping car park, not car park, sorry, shopping outdoor shopping centre. You know, that extra few pence may make the difference. But I also appreciate you got one heck of a job.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lockie. I think kind of touched upon perhaps the issue around perhaps the process here, whereas if these charges were included in the budget consultation originally, there would have been a consultation process that was widely sort of circulated that people could have engaged with. So I think that's been well made. Okay, I'm going to move on now to a question from Councillor Tim Bowen, which is in relation to car park season tickets.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and the Cabinet Board. They're just picking up off a lot of people when you're out and about, that people don't know about season tickets, which they can pick up for the town centres, parking, for, I know it's not part of us, but the Knoll, Margam Park. Our website seems to be really bad on this, that people can't access it properly, and when they get there, they totally confused and they go around in circles. Is there any way that we can start making life a little bit easier for these people and advertise it more, that season tickets are the way forward for people? You know, people are on about the cost on parking. It's far cheaper if they buy a season ticket. We need to be pushing this a lot more and making it more simple for people to go online to do. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Bowen. This was a recommendation that we put forward, but I think it didn't make it into the final report, so we wanted some clarity.
Yeah, if I can come back, Chair, yeah, probably an oversight on my part, actually. We took it as granted that we need to promote the season tickets, and in consultation, or when we'll be working with the head of leisure services to see if we can't get a better solution around the country parks, which are not under the parking services management under Steve Cook. So we recognise that there are opportunities there that we can potentially enhance that offer, not just for season tickets. I think at the Task and Finish group and the head of leisure highlighted opportunities where we might even be able to develop a menu of offers within the authority. So you might decide you want to go to the Aqua Splash or visit Avon Park or go into Margam Park, that you could buy all of those in a single transaction with the authority. So I think that's that was a very positive thing that came from the Task and Finish group. It wasn't oversight on my part that we didn't say that we would market it. We'll do that as parking services for the off-street permits in the parking services remit. But the other piece of work, I think, is a wider piece of corporate work that we need to do. So that's the position.
No, that's great. I think the wider piece of work was acknowledged in the report, but just that was missing. Is that okay, Tim?
Yeah, can I just quick before the other two come in? If when you start doing this marketing and everything, can it be sent out to members so we can get it onto our social pages and everything to say this is in place, so people will have a better, you know, they know it's out there for them?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely, Councillor, and we will work with our comms team to get that messaging out as well, and that will be shared with all members across the authority so that you can share those via your social media sites as well.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Bowen. Councillor Patterson, is your hand in relation to this item?
Well, it was just to add that the similar things apply to the beachfront with regards to businesses as in the town centres, and has already been raised. So thanks for that.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks, Suzanne. So the next item I want to bring up is in relation to the proposals around providing free bus travel in the authority, and certainly members of the Scrutiny Committee would recall that that was one of the primary reasons we wanted to look at this initially, was particularly in light of successful schemes happening in neighbouring countries, that would be a really good initiative for Neath Talbot to promote bus travel, try and get people back on the bus. And I think the need for that has become even more sort of acute in recent months with all of the challenges the bus industry's been facing. Actually, they need more people to be using the buses, and I think the schemes that are happening in other authorities are very good at actually getting people on the bus that don't normally do it. Now, I accept the response we've had in the report that funding something like that from the parking account is challenging, and I think that that's a very fair response from officers in terms of how such a scheme might be funded. But I suppose my question is, I suppose to the cabinet member is, although I accept it's challenging to fund it from the parking account, as a council, are we prepared to follow, I guess, the lead that Swansea are doing in really showing our support for the local bus industry and encouraging more people to use the buses? Because obviously we could prioritise this, from other funding other than the parking account if we felt it was something that was really important. And I know we've obviously taken some really important steps recently to support existing services, but this could really be a boost in getting passenger numbers up. So I'm wondering what sort of cabinet's view is on all sorts of schemes and whether it's something you'd be considering introducing in future.
Well, at the moment, I think it's looking at the state of the buses. I don't disagree with you, what you're saying. But fundamentally, at this time, at the pressure that this council is under, I can't see any way that we would fund that. I mean, we've got some funding figures, something like £80,000. So within truth, reality, at this time, I don't think that's a feasible, that is feasible at all. Not saying that we don't like it, because I do agree, and at the moment,
Generation of Streetscene services.
there we are. That Dave and myself and other officers last evening we were out in quite frank, because of the bus services. So it's something that we are passionate about. We would like to do it, but in truth, at this point of view, and we've got to be truthful in this. No.
Yeah, the additional thing, I'm not speaking on Scott's behalf, so apologies. I know that they haven't valued them and lose an early morning service, which people may lose jobs over. There really is a balance of trying to almost necessitate what is needed, perhaps for people just to get to work, because if they lose jobs and they want to be, you might not have even the ability or the income to get out to the shop, so it is a balance. It's a great idea, and obviously we want to support it, going forward with as a process. And there is chicken and egg. If we can get people more on buses and they become more viable, then it's a great idea. But I think it's just really the difficult job that Dave has got, just prioritising, just keeping the real essential services.
Scott,
Yeah, only briefly, just to touch upon what's been said. I mean, the fact of the matter is, that many members in this authority will know what the finances are just not there. The bus industry currently is very hostile at this moment in time, and services being cut back left, right, and centre. So big priorities, from officer perspective and cabinet perspective, we're looking at that. That's not to say, however, that we wouldn't be prepared to meet with you, as the chair of the scrutiny further down the line, to listen to your options, listen to some of your recommendations. But we've got to be quite clear, that whatever proposals come forward, the finance needs to come with it from somewhere as well. So, good suggestion in terms of what we've got, but we've got to be realistic then on any proposals that we want to roll out. Thereafter is we've got to make sure that the commitment financially is there as well.
Councillor,
No, Dave, go ahead.
Dave,
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to summarise the bus position then really, I'm very, very concerned at the moment with the stability of bus services in Neath and Talbot and more widely across the region. We're going to be facing down some very, very difficult decisions coming forward. You'll be aware of the bus emergency scheme that was introduced as part of the response to the pandemic. And that was an excellent scheme, and it kept local bus alive really, because without that emergency scheme, we wouldn't have the bus companies that we currently have operating today. Now that scheme, as you know, was due to end in March this year. They've extended that to the end of July, and they just this last week entered into a new transition funding agreement. But the money is much less at the national level than it was previously. The knock-on effect of that is that we're probably going to have essential services reduced. And as Councillor Hurley mentioned, we to sort of give a free service for a couple of weekends on the run up to Christmas, where we could be best spending that money to sustain some bus services all year round across the country to get people to their health appointments, to work, and indeed to learning. It is a real challenge for us. So in the current climate, I can't see how that's going to be deliverable. Again, there's nothing more than we'd love to do is provide those free services. I just don't think it's going to be a realistic prospect for the council with the budget position that they find themselves in. The other thing I wanted to mention, because we've referred to other local authorities and Swansea run a scheme like that. There's two things behind that. They have much higher parking fees and charges than we have, and what we propose was still cheaper. So the parking charges are much higher, which will probably release some funding within those authorities. But also the city has got a very big bid, and they were contributing as well to some of those initiatives, which were partly free parking, partly bus, and of course the council had taken a decision themselves that they would put their own funding into that. Now, unfortunately, we'd love to be in that position. I'm sure everybody here would love to be in that position, but unfortunately, not in that position. That's why I've recommended that that's not sustainable. I don't think it'll be ever sustainable from income from the parking account, if I'm being truthful. That would have to be part of the a budget setting prioritisation programme that council would need to consider going forward. And what I guess I'm saying to you is that you may need to put more subsidy in to keep the essential services going, and not free services at a couple of weekends and the Christmas period. That's all I wanted to sort of put that into context.
No, and thank you for the background there. And I think you sort of touched on the key point towards the end, which is actually, if it's not sustainable from the parking service, it becomes something that can be prioritised in the budget set process. Should the cabinet members feel it is something they wish to prioritise. And I think that's the kind of the challenge certainly with the cabinet members, is that there's a lot of benefits to doing a scheme like this. And I sort of take the point, if you weigh in at, do we need to allocate some funding to safeguard existing services versus a scheme like this? That is a challenge, but we need to recognise that getting more people on the buses is in itself helpful and can sustain services as well. And I think something to consider as well is if we are going to perhaps think about allocating some money to sustain services against maybe the risk of some of this funding having a shortfall, that if that funding is then not required for that, then we could look at carrying out the scheme. And I think that's, again, just a challenge to put back to the cabinet members to have an open mind, but if funding is available, if it's something you do agree is a good thing and it's something you'd like to do, then if that funding becomes available, then it could be something you consider. I think that's what the committee was very keen to get across.
So, like, on an organic item, if you'll indulge me just to go back as well, regarding the consultation, obviously in the new role that I've got in covering town centres, I've only been in there a short period, but I'm hopefully going to get out down with the local members who are covering the town centre areas, try and perhaps get a better engagement, and so we can consult, so we've got perhaps, you know, better engagement with them. So we on something like this, we can get the local members to get feedback prior to any reports are done as well, so that we are asking sort of after reports. You know,
yes, and I think certainly just to come right back to the first point again, you know, it was unfortunate that the allocations put in the budget before the detail was looked at in this instance, and I think that's caused everybody a degree of difficulty, not least in the fact that we're now into, you know, nearly into August, and a decision's not yet been made on parking charges, and we're not going to make that income target as a result. So there's a lot of the benefit, isn't it, to doing that work in advance. Okay, I've got an indication from Councillor Reynolds. Is that on buses, bus subsidies? Sonia?
It is, Chair, if you'll indulge me, and thank you for letting me attend the meeting. I wanted to attend as a member from an area which has, well, 2 buses a day that are often full and people can't get onto to get in towards our area. We can just about get to Ammanford, but we can't get into our own communities in Neath and Port Talbot. Now, you know, parking for us is a huge issue because, and I take exception to people saying, you know, if you can afford a car, you're not in poverty. Many people who are in poverty have to afford some sort of car in order to be able to travel out of communities like ours. And it is a real issue. And we've had to set up our own community transport scheme in order to get people to move. We would not be looking for free services. We don't want in communities like ours additional free services, but the council does need to look at subsidising services and making sure that communities are served. That is something that other councils are managing to do, and it's not happening here. And we've had support in the past. We would like support to enable bus transport for those communities that are more outlying and not penalise them by overcharging for parking at the same time, which effectively acts as an indirect tax in order to keep the council functioning and the budget balanced.
Okay, thanks, Sonia. I don't know if anyone wants to come back on those points. I'm not sure there's a direct question, but points well made on the same.
Yeah, Chair, what I would say is clearly, as you know, the Welsh Government are going to be struggling with their budget. They lobby central government to get more funding, and we lobby Welsh Government to give Neath Talbot more funding. It very much, you know, depends upon what funding comes down the line, really. And it's incumbent upon us all, really, all our communities, members and officers, to lobby national government and Welsh Government to invest in transport. So that's all I can really say in that response. As I say, the budget scenario for the authority is extremely challenging when you try to manage the budget with all the pressures that we have emerging in the social care sector, in our schools, in our waste services. There are new demands on all of the services. So there's nothing more than I'd love more that there's more money coming to bus and passenger transport, because that would make my service much more easier to manage and to deliver. But I recognise that there are a lot of financial pressures, unfortunately.
Yeah, only a quick observation. I do partly agree with Councillor Reynolds. I mean, I've got exactly the same issue, or very similar issues in high value transport, and one of my colleagues alluded to earlier on about the cutbacks early morning, where people literally cannot get to work with them. It's just over the borders in terms of Tyra and Anti and my stakes, so Bridget Thompson have got an issue with transport. So what I'd encourage all members here, you know, of all political persuasions, is to try and influence the powers to be in the Assembly. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Okay, I'm going to move on now to a question from Councillor Dacey, which is in relation to the amended hours for the seafront charges.
Right, thank you, Chair. My internet is dropping in and out, so if I collapse on this one, you'll have to take it over, Sean. The task and finish group carefully chose the amended hours for the seafront charges to put a greater burden of charges on visitors and not unfairly penalise residents who want to use the seafront and the associated businesses. Why has this been amended to suit the existing enforcement hours?
Yes, so, Councillor Dacey. It's a tough one. I know the task and finish group wanted to operate between 9 and 6, but if we send officers there and the officers are working till 8, then 2 hours down on the seafront, they won't be enforcing anything. It's all about the enforcement. I mean, I take on board what members have decided on this or recommended, but the actual charging numbers at the moment are 7 till 10, which we don't get officers there. I agree, but this is all about, if I need officers there, I want them down there at the peak times in the afternoons between 8 and 8.
Yeah, could they use them elsewhere? I mean, 6 o'clock seems a reasonable. It's same as the town centre, so the businesses on the beachfront are getting penalised for them extra 2 hours, perhaps missing out on people that would visit.
I think we need to. We're comparing our authority with some other authorities in some regards in terms of providing free parking or free initiatives. Yet, on the other hand, we're not doing similar comparative with the likes of City and County of Swansea, where they charge until 10 p.m. at night. So we've been tasked as officers to try and generate income. Now we've flexed on the seafront parking, so we have given some concession to support that arrangement, but ultimately Steve's got responsibility for the operational matters within that service, and there are great demands on that service, but ultimately we've got to maximise those enforcement hours. And of course, in the peak period, in the summer, obviously the seafront is popular. So we would tend to enforce that area, and we want to maximise that enforcement to generate the income and to get compliance with indiscriminate parking. So you're almost giving us an impossible challenge. You know, we've been asked to make money, and yet we've been asked to provide free services as well. And I'm sorry, but the two don't compute for me. We've looked at it operationally, and we think that that's a reasonable step into that arrangement. Now, that's not to say that the whole of this strategy is going to be monitored, and if we think there are benefits or disbenefits, then that will be reviewed in 12 months' time from implementation. So I'd like to add anything further, Chair.
Yeah, I sort of follow up on this one a little, and I was, as you imagine, quite involved in sort of the thinking behind the hours that we proposed, and I had some conversations with Steve and others around the protection of the income, and I think you've got to acknowledge as well that the seafront charges are doubling as a result of these proposals. So there's going to be a significant amount more income raised down the seafront than currently. So I think the seafront's doing quite a lot of heavy lifting in this proposal in terms of the income that it is raising. But I don't quite understand still the rationale of changing the charging hours to meet the enforcement hours. That still doesn't quite make sense to me. If we say we can raise a significant amount of income between 9 and 6, which I think was acknowledged. That is the peak time in terms of visitors attending the seafront, buying that all-day ticket. They only have one ticket choice they can buy. If there's 2 hours of spare enforcement capacity at the end of that after 6 o'clock, can that not be redeployed to residents' parking bays somewhere else? You know, I don't. That's what I'm trying to understand. Really, the only explanation we've been given is to align with enforcement hours. We've not been given a financial reason in terms of the response in the task and finish group. So we've not been told that the additional charging hours are there to raise income, or in particular. So I don't quite understand the rationale around enlightening it's the enforcement hours when we've acknowledged really that the peak income from visitors in the summer is daytime.
Again, we talk about residents versus visitors, and concessions in one part of the authority compared to another. There's some real fundamental challenges in the whole thing. So, okay, we're saying that the seafront, we want to have residents go there. Well, what about the country parks then? And what about all the other visitor attractions in the authority? I can't see how we can treat one area in isolation to any other of the services across.
I think it's quite a distinct area actually, in terms of it's not a country park with a gated entry. This is an area that contains businesses, much like a town centre area. It's a destination with businesses there. And I think that's one of the considerations we had as a task and finish group when we were discussing this, is that if for example, you were considering going for an evening meal in Port Talbot, you can park in the town centre for free after 6 o'clock behind Station Road, pop into a business on Station Road and have a meal. But if you want to go to the seafront and pop into a business there, we can't be charged until 10. So there isn't a level field in terms of that current position.
On a street, there is no charge at the moment, and there's, I believe, there's no charging, or there's no on the street when it goes up to, not 100%. I'll have to check, but you can still park on the street and go for a meal because you get it's limited weight in there, so it's free.
The proposal and that's been put forward here is to charge in the on-street labours on the seafront until 8 o'clock
in peak
season. I think that's what we're talking about here is peak season. So what I'm slightly confused at is that the response given in the report only talks about enforcement operation. We've had some other sort of reasons given to us today. I'm trying to unpick what the rationale is behind the 8 to 8 hours. It doesn't.
Isn't the intention that during your peak period you maximise your income?
Absolutely.
And you want to enforce those operational hours to make sure that the people are paying. Now, really, if we were to really consider about income generation much more challenging, we should be extending our charging hours across the piece to 10 o'clock at night, or if for example, Neath multi-storey car park is open till 11 p.m, we should be maxing that out and charging it till 11 p.m. So there are some fundamental principles where I think there's no clear sort of overview of that strategy.
No, and I think that's what's coming out of this discussion actually. You know, the rationale isn't clear.
And that ultimately, we've been trying to strike a balance around that, around the concession then that we've been trying to give there. It seemed to be, when you talk about residents, which residents are you referring to, Chair?
In terms of
visiting the seafront?
I guess people living in the local area, people living in
what do you mean by local area? Well, really, that's fine, isn't it, for people living in the Talbot area, but they're within a region of being able to walk and cycle to the seafront.
Well, I think we're talking about people beyond that region, of course. Yeah.
You're now changing that you want to expand it to the whole.
No, I think it's quite clear when we're talking about people parking at the seafront. We're talking about people who are driving to the seafront, not people who are walking.
If they're choosing to drive to the seafront then, aren't they? And they know that there's charges at the seafront and they would be expected to pay. Or they choose not to go to there and they go and visit elsewhere.
No, absolutely. I think the point.
So is it about local residents or is it about the wider authority?
But it's about people living in the local authority area who have to drive to the seafront because there's poor public transport access.
Yeah, but if you go to the beach, you can expect people to pay a charge.
Absolutely, and the task and finish group is quite clear that and supported the principle of charging at the seafront and has supported the principle of increasing charges at the seafront. What the task and finish group is seeking to do is make sure that those increasing charges does not adversely impact businesses on the seafront and residents who wish to visit the seafront for recreational purposes, for mental health purposes, for exercise, etc., that can't otherwise walk or cycle to the seafront. So the proposals as put forward by the committee was that the charging hours between 9 and 6 would place the greatest burden on charging during peak season on visitors who park there during the day. And then in the evenings, where visitors don't tend to turn up at the seafront en masse in the evening, actually, that might be a local resident who wants to go and have a meal. We're not within walking distance of the seafront. And if their choice is impacted by a £4 parking charge, they may go elsewhere. So making sure that there's a level playing field for all the businesses on the seafront that don't have their own car parking facilities versus town centre areas, and also not unfairly penalising people who don't have access to amenity space in their own community and drive to the seafront and use that as an amenity space. And that's the balance we try to strike, which would still result in a significant amount. And I think it's fair to say the seafront is a lot of heavy lifting by having that significant increase in charges. So that was the rationale from the Scrutiny Committee's point of view. What's not clear is what the rationale behind the response is. And that's what I think we're trying to understand is. The current hours are 7 till 10. Our proposal was 9 till 6. The current proposal is 8 till 8. The only rationale being given from 8 till 8 is that that's the current enforcement hours. And it seems to me that the enforcement hours should fit the charging hours. And if we make a reasonable decision on what the charging hours, but what we've not understood yet is what the rationale behind the charging hours is. And I think that's what we're trying to get out of this discussion, really.
I think we've looked at it and we've reduced them down. My intention now, what I've been tasked with, is to get additional income in. Now, why would I then close the window of additional income when I got an officer there to enforce on 8 to 8 and condense it and lose 3 hours worth of enforcement? That's coming from an enforcement side of it. I've been tasked with meeting this budget deficit. And why would I constrict my hours of enforcement when I've been tasked with enforcing and getting additional income?
And don't you enforce your most popular locations?
I think I don't really want to extend this too much because I feel like I'm taking a bit of a liberty as a chair here in this discussion. But the committee isn't saying don't enforce. What the committee's put forward in its recommendation is charge between 9 and 6, enforce between 9 and 6. That's the peak time. That's where the majority of the income comes in. And actually, the loss of income in not charging in the evening is more than offset by doubling the income, by doubling the charges on season and off season. So I think we're not saying we're going to reduce any income from the seafront. The charges are increasing, they're doubling. So there's a significant amount of extra income being realised. I think I want to bring the council in.
No, it was only for clarification. I know we speak about going into town and having free parking for meals, but then when we go to the beach, I'm assuming again, I may not be right in, but most of the restaurants have their own car parks.
Not all.
No, so you've got to pay your rent.
Some do. Yeah, some go back.
That's only the car parks. I mean, the businesses on the seafront, apart from the coffee shop, they're the same owner, I think. The business on the seafront. Yeah, the front, but they've got their own car park. They've got their own car park.
Some restaurants, like the Sophia's restaurant, it does. They go in that car park. Its own car. What about the front?
So there's of the restaurants on the seafront. The Bagalwa has a car park. Front has a car park, Cinnamon Kitchen has a car park,
right.
And then Franco's, Remo's and Memo's coffee shop don't have car parks, and they rely on the council car parks for their trade.
The only other thing is, as Dave was sort of alluding to, resident-wise, I probably class myself as a visitor, and I go down the beach quite often on an evening, and you'll see lots of people there on the evening, so it's that difficulty of managing what we class as residents, will be residents of Neath, Talbot, or residents of the beach area, because I know that if we come down on mass, then it obviously impacts on you as local members in that, you know, it's overloaded. So I suppose it's got to be managed, and that's the only way of managing it. It's a difficult one, really. So.
Okay, I'm going to bring in some other members from the committee now. I've got Councillor Hanson first.
Thank you, and I am a visitor, obviously, but I am a ward member for the beach, so it does really impact on me. I have the most casework in the summer from illegal parking. Now, I want to know, is there a plan B if these charges are avoided? Because they're completely avoidable. People don't have to pay. And I understand that there will be repercussions for people who park illegally. But most of those come via the police, which are not doing it. So if people say that they can't or won't pay the extra parking bay fees, and I think that it is most likely that people will avoid paying them, have we got sufficient, and will it cost a lot for us to chase up parking fees which are issued, of parking fines which are issued and not paid? Will this cost the council money to chase up? And are the officers saying that anybody that stays longer in the car parks during the peak hours will be fined? Or is it just going to be the case that the officers are going to have to, and I understand their point of view, spread throughout the county borough? So the fact that you put on a sign, you're going to have to pay this amount for this time, a lot of people just will migrate into the local community to find places on roads which do not have to be paid for at all. Now, my feeling is that the whole idea of trying to use parking as a cash cow in all of these areas, it's not something I would think would be the first. Were other options considered before the task and finish group were labelled and said, right, you've got to find 300,000? Were other options considered? And I would like to know that as well. And are we going to be assured that people are going to be fined or ticketed if they illegally park? And if they illegally park, is it going to cost the council money to chase up, the legal department, to chase up fines which are not paid? Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hanson,
I'll answer this, Chair. If there is one tariff down the seafront, Councillor Patterson, so if you go in at 9 o'clock, you can stay till it's £4 a day.
I'm going to come on to that because that's the next item, isn't it? There are other items.
The only time you're going to get a ticket is if you don't purchase a ticket, and that's and then an enforcement officer, what I'm saying to you is, once these proposals are done, we can dedicate an officer then on the seafront to enforce the limited waiting bays, the car parking, and we will be taking it on, not the legal section as we are now. So if a PCN is issued for not having a pay display ticket or not buying ticket through the app, then yes, we'll chase it. It's not down to the legal section. Currently, once a PCN is issued, my department chase it up, and it's taken all the way.
Okay, but there's going to be extra work for you if you have extra.
So we're doing it now. I mean, officers go to the car park.
The bays are free at the moment.
The car parks, no, it's two.
No, the bays are
the bays.
Yeah.
But it is a 2-hour limited waiting, which we, but the officer down there, if he goes along the bays, when he's got to log in every vehicle, along those bays, then he's got to come back 2 hours later to see if the vehicle's there. It is, it's officer's time is there. Then will just do the car park. But
lovely. Okay.
Once the charge comes in, you buy it through the app, and the officer can charge and chase it up on his handheld. Then if you've got a ticket.
Right. So okay, the assurance is that if people do park in the bays and they don't pay the fine, they will be ticketed, and you will chase that up. So my next train of thought is then, anybody from the local area who, and I think the chair was alluding to this, who at present visits the beachfront at the moment free for a limited time can not then do it. They would have to go first thing in the morning and in the evening. And I would say that as a as a lone female walking a dog, I wouldn't want to do it at those times. So it's all very well sitting in a committee and saying, right, well, people can do this and people can do that. But the reality of it is quite different. And I would also ask if people in the locality have been consulted.
I mean, I don't, if you're walking a dog at 7 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock in the night, I don't know what that's got to do with the parking charges. Maybe I
I think that's I'm suggesting they're going to visit, try and avoid the parking charges would have to
yes, exactly
earlier than they currently do, because the laybys are currently 2 hours free all day. So I think
you can choose the time, yeah.
You go down at 10 o'clock and walk your dog.
Yeah, but you're still choosing whether it's between 8 and 8 or 9 and 6.
Yeah,
that's the point. As it currently stands. So by introducing the charges, you should drive to a better opportunity to have a space to park, albeit you've got to pay. Whereas at the moment, you can park in there 8 o'clock in the morning and go home at 11 o'clock at night. So the local resident hasn't choice anyway.
Well, there is a Mal's Marauders walking group which uses the beachfront twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. These men are go in there for their mental health. Now, a lot of them don't come from Sandfields at all. They come from other areas of the county borough. And I think this is where the chair was alluding earlier, that, you know, what do you regard as residents? If you are going to charge for a small period of time, at the time when the marauders are actually walking, it could be £6-8 extra a week for someone who's coming down to the beach for their mental health to have a walk. Now, I understand officers' point of view on this. You've been asked to do a tremendously hard job, and I totally get that. But my main concern here is, you know, are we looking at the full range of our priorities as a council to make it a lovely place to work and live, if we were ruling out certain members of the public who really cannot afford to come down 3 times a week to the beach at times when the council officers think they should be coming? And I'll leave it there.
Okay, I don't there's anything to add to that. Okay, I've got Councillor Tim Bowen.
Yeah, it's only a quick question to Steve. It is £4 for the day is like, you know, that's brilliant. I never go down there in the evening, so is it just an hourly charge or the 2 hourly charge if you can't park on the front? Is it, you know, we don't have to pay £4 then? Is it just a normal charge?
Sorry, Councillor Boyd. What happens? It will be £4 per day, as currently is, but the bays will be £1 per hour, maximum stay of 2 hours. So there will be there should be turnover, but the bays themselves will only be charged peak times, and then during the winter period they will be free.
Right. The main car parks, and if you can't get on the seafront, what are they? Are they per hour as well?
No, it's a flat rate of £1, £4, £2 at the moment, but the recommendation is it goes up to £4 a day.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you just go down there for the 2 hours in the night, you'd still have to pay the £4.
If you're in the car parks, yes.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Bowen. I've got Councillor Clement Williams. Carol.
Thanks, Chair. So basically, I'm coming back to the IIA here. The officer answered and said that local people would be able to walk and cycle to the seafront. Again, I have 2 members of my family that can't walk more than a few yards without having to stop. they would never be able to walk or cycle to the seafront. And in fact, if I park in the car park across the road, it takes about 20 minutes to get from the car park to the seafront. So again, this would adversely affect disabled people, and come back to the IIA, it needs to be redone. You also said about not distinguishing between one area and another, i.e. the parks and the seafront, but you're doing it for Pontardawe, so there's no consistency here, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Officers, I need to respond to that. Simple point of screen is.
It's only, if you don't mind, sorry, and it's only a question for officers again. If we go down the road and we in a deficit and we know that we've got to do repairs to car parks, could it come to a point that the car park might just be closed?
Yes.
And then we're going to have bigger impacts, and it is really a balance of.
I will, can I, Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
With regard to the limited waiting bays along the seafront members, the blue badge scheme applies to them. And it applies that if you've got a blue badge and you park in the limited waiting bays, you're exempt the time limit, and you're also exempt the payment as well if you're a blue badge holder under the regs.
Is that right though? Because they although they got a blue badge, they've got to pay for the other car parks. So sorry, it doesn't. It's not consistent.
Yeah, no, the blue badge scheme is an on-street scheme. The bays along the seafront on street, the regulations apply to the bays on street. The blue badge booklet tells you that it's an on-street scheme and that you need to contact the local authority to see whether or not they will grant you any dispensations in their car parks. The seafront itself is totally different. It's on street. And the regulations there say that the blue badge holder is exempt the time limit and they're exempt the payment when we introduce it.
Chair, can I come back on that, please?
No, I think the officer's given the response, and I know
no,
that
but
is fact.
Chair, I think that
I just need to let members know that a member of the press joined the meeting ago as well, just to be aware.
Just very briefly, Chair, if you don't mind, I think we're in danger of setting a precedent here. If you start introducing parking fees for on-street parking in the seafront, where does that stop? You could charge for parking anywhere.
You can.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to move on now to Councillor Dacey regarding overnight camper van parking.
Right, okay, thanks, Sean. The task force group recommended exploring the possibility of overnight camper van parking to the seafront to raise revenue and increase visitors, but it's not been included in the report. Is it going to be considered?
Yes, Chair. Yes, Councillor Dacey was discussed, and we haven't forgotten about it. We do to take a seafront strategy report with the head of leisure services regarding the seafront, and the camper van parking will be part of that remit. And we'll also look at it county-wide then, whether or not we can introduce it elsewhere within the county borough. Yeah.
That'd be great. That's a great idea, because as a camper van user myself, loads of people say that they like the Talbot beachfront and Marine Park and the mall and things, and there's hardly anywhere to stay. So I'd certainly recommend we look into that.
We have identified 2 areas where we think camper van parking might lend itself, but this will form part of the seafront strategy when we have discussions with the head of leisure services.
Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. I've got Councillor Patterson now.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a local member with a car park on the beach there, it has attracted untold antisocial behaviour. My residents really tried very hard and succeeded to get it gated during the evening and night. And I'm sure that Councillor Dacey wouldn't want to park his van there when these people are performing in the car park. And I suspect that, it's going to be a very unruly place then, put it that way. It won't be quiet. I mean, I would agree with him. if it were lovely and quiet, why wouldn't you want to spend a night where you could walk to the beach for the sunset, come back to your camper van? But I suspect that in reality, without that gate on the car park, there would be untold unruly behaviour, and the police do not assist. They are busy, busy, busy until you call them. So thanks.
Thanks, Amy. Councillor Parton. I'm sort of outside the remit of what we're looking at in this committee, but I don't know if
I'm making the point about, you know, would it even work?
I think it will be considered as part of the seafront strategy, and I think what we needed to understand today was just whether our point had been taken back in action, and we've had that confirmation.
Just to, you know, we absolutely agree, Councillor Patterson. We're very acutely aware of the issues there, and as the chair alluded, we'll take that forward with the head of as part of the strategy. And it may be such that, you know, a location is identified that might not be in the current car parks that exist at present. I just don't know at this stage, and it might be a designated area that will be much more easily managed in that respect. But absolutely take on board your points. And of course, we struggled with the antisocial behaviour at the seafront. Considerable time, haven't we?
So I just sort of a follow-up, I suppose. Maybe you may know the answer to this, as whether this has been the seafront strategy as well. One of the recommendations we made was around looking at sort of mitigation measures around seafront parking. I think we discussed it in the task and finish group around immediate residents adjacent to the seafront. This, I think we acknowledged earlier, that this may push people to trying to seek on-street parking in residential streets. It's not been picked to report what the response to some recommendation when they have the reassurance.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Chair, and we recognise the risks associated with parking charges. Something that we are aware of. It's something we will need to monitor once the new is coming into being. I think in the task and finish group, I advised that we probably look at the resident on-street parking schemes, and that policy document probably needs to be reviewed in that respect. It gives it's a little bit inflexible, if I'm honest, in the way that it's applied. So I think there's an opportunity that where we have hotspots, that we can review that policy position going forward. The other aspects of the policy document in terms of residents parking need to take on board as well the sort of revolution that we're going to have in terms of EV infrastructure and charging. So I think just reassure the Scrutiny Committee and the Cabinet, I think that needs to be picked up as a separate work and possibly a task group based on that specific piece of work as well, because it will need some fundamental change to policy.
Okay, great. So I've got a question now from Councillor Wayne Carpenter, which is in relation to the Neath pedestrianised zone.
Yeah, it's concerning the evenings at Neath, and we do appreciate that with so many pavement cafes now, it can be extremely dangerous with the traffic moving into the town that time of night. However, I'm just a little bit concerned that this doesn't end up spilling over into the morning sessions. Having spoken to a lot of traders, particularly the market traders, they would be extremely upset and disappointed if we shut the town in the mornings to them. So it's only a question, will this proposal for the evening closure also spill over eventually to the morning sessions, which run up until 10:30? Thank you.
So firstly, the town centre is quite complex in the way that it receives goods and services and deliveries to the businesses. We need to do a feasibility, proper feasibility into any change that we make to the orders at Neath. It wouldn't affect the morning sessions. I think the issues seem to be emerging that when the orders are relaxed at 5 p.m, then we're allowing traffic to travel through the town centre and park in the town centre. And the decision prior to that, driving through there was sort of prohibited and enforced by the police. But we changed that order at the request of members following a review to support the nighttime economy there. So I think that there would need to be in this particular case, I will admit, it needs a very detailed and in-depth consultation with the town centre traders, because by restricting that in the way I think that we are thinking of, as the scrutiny panel has suggested, that could detrimentally affect the businesses there who will need access and egress during that time of the day. So I'm not ruling anything in or anything out, but it does need to be considered as a feasibility. Obviously, that needs to be put on the list for consideration as part of the end of year prioritisation programme of things that will be considered for feasibility going forward. I fully understand that, you know, people are enjoying themselves in the evenings on street, and that is a risk. We don't want vehicles, marauding vehicles, going into pedestrians. The whole security around the town centre needs to be reviewed as well. I know emergent protect duty. So I think it needs a fresh look at how the town centre is managed there. The complication in Neath is, of course, that a lot of the premises haven't got rear access for deliveries, and they come in the evenings and out of hours because we pedestrianise that zone between 10:30 in the morning and 5 p.m. So there is an undertaking that if that gets prioritised in the autumn, that will be looked at in depth and following a detailed consultation with the traders and, of course, the town centre locally elected members.
Thank you. Thanks, David. It's just that I think consultation, once again, is the key with this, because we've got to watch that we don't defeat ourselves wanting to see our town centres prosper by restrictions being put on cars entering the town. I can see the health and safety aspect of cars with pavement cafes, but I think that we've got to be careful. Users of cafes and restaurants and even the Gwyn Hall, you know, are using the town centre during the evenings, and I think it would be a big loss to many traders if we took that away. But if we could give that very careful consideration first, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. I'll just ask a quick follow-up question. I'll bring the panel member in, and I think we recognise this is something that's worth looking at, and appreciate the challenges in the sort of certainly the highways capital programme in prioritising this. I just wondered whether we might speak to some of our colleagues, perhaps in Regen and town centres, to consider if it's not being able to be funded out the highways work. There's clearly wider benefits for town centre regeneration from reviewing this, and it may be another avenue that could be explored.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are, I don't know enough about the Regen side of the town centres, but I know there are a lot of opportunities to secure grants for the town centres, and that may well be an opportunity where we can do a joint approach on that. Happy to work in any way to achieve that feasibility.
Yeah,
fantastic. For the best outcome of everybody, taking on board the concerns that members have raised as well.
Yeah, there's two current consultations going on regarding town centre strategies as well, and also this re-engagement of the traders or whatever, against really trying to involve everything in part of the consultation and make sure it gets fed back to the two consultations in process. So, thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, so I have reached the end of the questions we've prepared for the meeting. I've got an indication from Councillor Lockyer will bring in, and then Councillor Goldup John, and then we'll see how we can sum up this discussion, potentially with a recommendation from the committee. So I'll bring in Councillor Lockyer first.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a comment on the point just made. You got Dave Griffith saying that obviously local members going to be consulted with the review of the town centre, which is great, and we've had some discussions already at length regarding that. And then the other comment was there's two other feasibility exercises going on within the towns, and I know nothing about it. So as a local member, I just wondered when are we going to be included and when are we not going to be included?
Yeah, in defence of that, to answer Councillor Lockyer, it's only last week I heard about it. No, it's this week I've heard about it as well. So it's probably something that's only just initially started, but I'll make sure that you were fully included. And I update you myself when it comes to it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for reassurance. I can see Andrew Collins just indicated. Did you want to add anything to that?
Are you referring to the place plans, Councillor Hurley, with?
I think so.
Yeah. Yes. So if I can just explain, what's happening is the regeneration team are working with consultants, the urbanists, to do what we call place plans for our town centre. So that's not just Neath, Talbot and Pontardawe, but also our secondary and tertiary town centres, places like Talbot, Carmarthen, Britain Ferry, etc. So they're going to draw up a series of documents for setting out potential public realm regeneration projects that we might want to consider for our town centres in the future going forward. The work is still ongoing, Councillor Lockyer. It's not going to be completed probably until the end of the calendar year. But when we do have the produce from the urbanists, there will be a series of workshops and consultations, of course, which will include local members, obviously. So we're just not at that stage yet, but it's a piece of work that's ongoing in the background, but it will be brought forward for full consultation, I can assure you.
Fantastic. It's something we can pick up in scrutiny in due course. So
can I also come in on that point? Members may not be aware, but we have secured a grant this year for feasibility in the town centre as well, to see how we can enhance the town centre in terms of active travel and walking. So Andrew, I need to obviously, until we've done the feasibility study, we're not in a position to consult. Councillor Neath John has kindly to look at that feasibility because of his personal interest around walking and cycling as well. The local members will be part of that consultation as well, Councillor Lockyer. It's just that I'm not at a position yet to be able to table anything. And we will need to align that with Andrew's placemaking study that he's undertaking so that the two feasibilities are aligned and not in conflict with one another.
Okay, great. I think we need to get back now to the to parking, but that's really helpful to have that background. Indication from Councillor Nathan Goldup John.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks everyone for a really robust discussion. I think it was very helpful just to understand where different people's perspectives and points of view. I just wanted to add a comment, if I may, on the general principle of using, as Councillor Paddison said, car parking as a cash cow. I think, you know, this administration is just past its first year, so you can't really blame it. But continuous administrations have been using car parking as a means to provide council services. And I think as a principle, it's just fundamentally wrong. You know, you cannot provide council services on car parking when you just don't know how many people are going to use the car parks. And go into what Dave said, and I completely agree, we can't say we need to reduce increase car parking fees, but then also provide other things for free, because that just doesn't make sense, because we don't know how much money we're going to get in. And I just think it just puts this undue pressure on everyone involved, rather than looking at the problem holistically and actually addressing what we're trying to achieve with car parking. Because it's not it's not a cash cow, as Suzanne Patterson said. That's not what its purpose is. And I think we just need to take a proper look at car parking. And next year, when we come to set budget, I truly hope that we do not factor in any car parking, and it's just an additional bit of income that we can spend on discretionary services rather than anything else, because it's just so disheartening. You know, this conversation is just talking about like levels of car parking and car parking fees on some of the most vulnerable and just how it's applicable, and it's not mending relationships between anyone. So that's me on my pedestal, sorry, but yeah, thank you.
No, thanks, that's fine. Councillor Patterson, is this on the same point?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on that, Chair, in that on the budget proposals, I think the administration said they were going to raise charges from between 10 and 15%. Some of these are 100%. So I just know how that squares the circle. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Patterson. Right, so I'm going to try and sort of sum up the discussion that we've had today now and make sure that before the Cabinet Board meeting that there's just a clear indication where the committee stands on some of these issues, because we've had quite a good discussion. Now, I'm proposing to put forward an amendment just to reflect some discussion we've had, and I think that needs to include, I think the committee members felt very strongly about the blue badge issue and linked with the IIA, and I think it would be reassuring to committee members if we made a recommendation that reinstated the concession to blue badge holders as we'd initially proposed, in order to address the concern that we have around the impact on disabled people. So that's one thing I'm proposing to put in. And I am also proposing that we put forward a recommendation that there's a consultation undertaken on these proposals before they're implemented. A lot of members seem to feel very strongly about that. So I think we should put that forward as well. And the other options are in relation to the seafront parking hours. And I'll certainly speak from my point of view. I'm not really satisfied that we've been given sufficient explanation as to why the current proposals have been chosen. So I would propose that we recommend what our initial task and finish group recommended. So I've got some wording for that. If committee members are happy for me to read that and circulate it on the in the chat, and then we can take a vote on that and then see how we go, if that's okay. So I'm just gonna, if members bear with me for a moment while I just get this ready.
Chair, if I may, whilst you're getting that ready, can I just query, are these 3 different amendments or are they just one amendment?
So it's going to be one amendment. Was there anything you thought we might need to add to that, Councillor John?
Not necessarily add, and I get members' concerns about consultation, but the later we implement any sort of increase in car parking fees, not that I'm necessarily, anyway, not the point, but the later we implement car parking fees, the less money we're going to be able to collect to meet that target that we've set in budget. So I'm just concerned that that will have a negative impact on the overall council's budget, and then we're not being economically sensible in what we're delivering. The other things I agree with, but just on that specific point.
For clarity, I'm not sure if it was when you were at the meeting, we had an implication from parking officers that there's a legal notification period that needs to be undertaken, which is, I think, 28 days before this needs to be implemented. The officers clarified that they weren't intending to actually consult, but just to go through the legal notification process. So what this recommendation could do, if it was accepted by Cabinet, would mean that the council would undertake consultation in parallel with that, I suppose.
Understood.
That's up to the Cabinet member and officers how they might well implement it, but you know, the impacts of that can be considered at that point. I'm just going to paste into the chat, and I'll read it. That so the proposal is that the recommendations on page 31 and 35 of the report be approved subject to the following amendments, which is that option 6, that the charge now is being amended to 9 till 6. Option 7, the charge now is being amended to 9 till 6. The additional recommendation 1 reads that blue badge holders be granted an extra hours parking on top of existing tariffs in town centres to reflect the additional type of safety required to ensure there's no adverse impact on disabled people as a result of the increase in hourly parking charges, and that an additional recommendation be added that a full consultation is undertaken on these proposals with the community, including businesses and residents, before implementation of any changes. So that's the recommendation for the amendment that I'm putting forward. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Lynch, second that. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Tom just to go through the process, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. So now that we have a proposer and a seconder, this amendment has been validly proposed. So what we'll now do is take a vote. So because we're in a different setting today, what I'd like to do is ask members to basically vote on for, against, and any abstentions. So first of all, if I could ask members in the room and also at home to raise their hand if they would like to abstain. Okay, so we don't have any indications, so there's no abstentions. So secondly now, if I could ask members who wish to vote for the amendment to either raise their electronic hands or raise their hands in the room. So this is for voting for the amendment. Thank you, members. And then finally, if I could ask members to raise their hand if anyone is against the amendment.
Can we put the hands down, please?
Thank you very much. Okay, so the results of that is there are 7 votes for, no votes against, and no abstentions. Therefore, I can confirm that the amendment has now passed. So in light of the amendment having passed today, that now becomes part of the substantive recommendation that's before the members. So we'll be now asking members to vote on it. So if we could have a proposer, please, for the substantive recommendation.
Suppose, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. And if I could have a seconder as well, please. Thank you, Councillor Carpenter. Okay, members, you will now vote on the recommendations. So we're going to follow the same process again. So if I could ask any members who wish to abstain to please raise their hands either electronically or in the room. Just to clarify, Councillor Goldham-John, are you abstaining? Thank you very much.
Abstaining.
Thank you very much, members. Okay, so if I could now also ask, members to please vote for the recommendation. If you do wish to vote for the recommendation, please could you raise your hands either electronically or in the room. Thank you very much, members. That has now been approved with 5 voting for and 2 abstentions. Therefore, I can confirm the recommendation is passed, and that includes this agenda. So I'll now pass you back to the chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, members, and thanks, Tom, for taking everyone through the voting process there. And again, just for clarity for any members of the public who might be watching this recording back, I don't think we've got anyone in the meeting at the moment. Now that the committee has made its recommendations to the Cabinet Board, a meeting will follow this one where the decision will be made on what the final parking charges are. Okay, I've got an indication from Councillor Sonia Reynolds. Do you want to come in before I close the meeting?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment. I was very much taken with the comments of Councillor Nathan Goldrup, and I think we need to reiterate to the cabinet members who are here that using charges like this at this late stage in the year as well to balance a budget is not appropriate. And, you know, we need to, you know, they need to think of other ways of taking this forward, and that it could be considered an indirect tax on our population. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Reynolds. I don't know if I wants to come back when we have concluded the discussion involved, but I'll allow the cabinet member to respond if they wish.
Yeah, Chair, I was only going to suggest to Jane that we have an adjournment in between the two meetings for about 15 minutes so I can consult with my colleagues.
So if we could come back, should we say 25 past?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, that's fantastic. So there's no other items on today's agenda, and I've got no urgent items either. So that ends the business for today, but there will be an adjournment before the Cabinet Board meeting. So any officers that will be joining the Cabinet Board meeting, please join by 25 past. Please. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Cheers,
Thank
all.
you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.